What happens when one of music's most legendary icons comes face to face with late-night television's most controversial host? You won't believe what unfolds when Cher sits down with Jimmy Kimmel for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview, only to witness one of the most explosive confrontations in talk show history. The tension that erupted last night has sent shockwaves through Hollywood and left viewers stunned by what they witnessed unfold live on television. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when two entertainment powerhouses clash in the most unexpected way possible. The stage was set for what appeared to be another typical Tuesday night episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live. Cher, the iconic singer and actress, had been booked to promote her latest documentary and upcoming tour dates. The 77-year-old superstar arrived at the Hollywood Boulevard studio looking radiant in a flowing black ensemble, her trademark long hair cascading over her shoulders. She'd done hundreds of these interviews over her 6-decade career, and this was supposed to be just another friendly chat about her latest projects. But from the moment Cher walked onto that familiar set, something felt different. The usual warmth that characterizes most celebrity interviews was noticeably absent. Kimmel, known for his quick wit and sometimes sharp tongue, seemed unusually tense as he welcomed the Grammy-winning legend to his show. The audience erupted in their typical enthusiastic applause, completely unaware that they were about to witness television history in the making. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the one and only Cher," Kimmel announced with his signature grin. But those paying close attention could detect something forced about his enthusiasm. Cher gracefully made her way to the guest chair, waving to the crowd with the poise that only comes from decades of performing in front of millions. The first few minutes proceeded normally enough. Kimmel asked about Cher's documentary, which chronicles her rise from a backup singer to one of the world's most recognizable entertainers. Cher responded with her characteristic candor and humor, sharing anecdotes about her early days in the music industry and her evolution as an artist. The audience was clearly captivated by her stories, hanging on every word as she described the challenges of being a woman in the male-dominated entertainment world of the 1960s. However, seasoned viewers of late-night television could sense an underlying current of tension brewing beneath the surface. Kimmel's questions, while seemingly innocuous, carried a subtle edge that hadn't been present in his previous interviews with major stars. His follow-up questions seemed designed to push boundaries rather than simply facilitate conversation. "You know, Cher, you've been very vocal about politics lately," Kimmel said, leaning back in his chair with a smirk that would soon prove to be ill. "Some people might say that celebrities should stick to entertaining and leave the serious stuff to the politicians." The comment hung in the air like a challenge. Cher's expression shifted almost but those familiar with her fiery personality recognized the warning signs. Her posture straightened, and her eyes narrowed slightly as she processed what had just been said to her on live television. "Well, Jimmy," Cher replied, her voice maintaining its melodic quality while carrying an unmistakable steel undertone. "I've been around long enough to know that staying silent when you see injustice isn't really an option for me anymore." The audience applauded enthusiastically, but Kimmel seemed determined to press further. What happened next would set the stage for one of the most uncomfortable moments in late-night television history. "But don't you think there's a responsibility that comes with having such a large platform?" Kimmel continued, his tone becoming more pointed. "I mean, when you tweet something to your millions of followers, shouldn't you be more careful about the message you're sending?" The question struck a nerve that Kimmel clearly hadn't anticipated. Cher's decades of experience dealing with dismissive attitudes toward her intelligence and political awareness came flooding back in that moment. This wasn't just another interview question, it was a challenge to her right to have opinions, delivered with the kind of condescending tone that she'd been fighting against her entire career. The tension in the studio became palpable as Cher took a moment to formulate her response, and what came next would change everything. "Careful," Cher repeated, her voice rising slightly as she leaned forward in her chair. "Jimmy, I've been careful my entire life. I was careful when I was told I couldn't sing, careful when I was told I couldn't act, and careful when I was told to keep my mouth shut about things that matter. But, you know what? Being careful got me nowhere except pushed around by men who thought they knew better." The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the light-hearted banter they'd come to expect from celebrity interviews. Kimmel, perhaps realizing he'd struck a deeper nerve than intended, attempted to backtrack with his trademark humor. But the damage was already done. "Hey, I'm just saying that with great power comes great responsibility," Kimmel said with a forced chuckle, making a Spider-Man reference that fell completely flat in the increasingly tense atmosphere. Maybe we could all use a little more Spider-Man wisdom in our Twitter feeds. The joke landed with a resounding thud. Cher's expression hardened, and for a moment, the legendary performer looked every bit as formidable as she had during her most powerful onstage moments. The woman who had conquered every entertainment medium wasn't about to be dismissed or patronized on live television. "Are you seriously comparing my political engagement to a comic book character?" Cher asked, her voice now carrying the full weight of her decades in the spotlight. "Jimmy, I've used my platform to raise awareness about issues that affect real people's lives. I've supported veterans, LGBTQ+ rights, and social justice causes for longer than some of your viewers have been alive." The studio audience began to murmur among themselves, sensing that something unprecedented was unfolding before their eyes. This wasn't scripted banter or a promotional segment gone slightly off track. This was a genuine confrontation between two entertainment figures with vastly different perspectives on celebrity responsibility. Kimmel, now clearly flustered by the direction the interview had taken, made the critical error of doubling down instead of gracefully changing the subject. His next words would prove to be the point of no return in what had started as a routine late-night appearance. "Look, Cher, I respect your passion. I really do," Kimmel said, his tone becoming increasingly condescending. "But sometimes I wonder if celebrities like yourself really understand the complexity of the issues you're tweeting about. Primera mea. N. No. Do you really think a pop star's opinion on foreign policy carries the same weight as someone who's actually studied these things?" The insult hit its mark with devastating precision. Cher's face flushed with anger as she processed what had just been said to her in front of millions of viewers. The dismissive phrase "pop star," reducing her entire multifaceted career to a single diminutive label, was the final straw in what had become an increasingly hostile exchange. A pop star. Cher's voice was now ice cold, each word delivered with surgical precision. "Jimmy, I've been fighting for causes you probably couldn't even pronounce when I started my career. I've testified before Congress. I've worked with humanitarian organizations around the world, and I've put my money where my mouth is for decades." The audience was now completely silent, transfixed by the spectacle unfolding before them. Even the usually animated studio crowd seemed to understand that they were witnessing something extraordinary and potentially career-defining for both participants. Kimmel, perhaps sensing that the interview was spiraling beyond his control, attempted one final maneuver to regain the upper hand. His next comment would prove to be the catalyst for what happened next, transforming an already tense situation into a full-blown confrontation that would dominate headlines for weeks to come. "Hey, I'm not trying to attack you here," Kimmel said, raising his hands in mock surrender while maintaining his smug expression. "I'm just suggesting that maybe, just maybe, there's value in listening to experts, instead of getting our news from celebrity Twitter accounts. That's all I'm saying." The condescending tone, combined with a dismissive gesture, was the final provocation that pushed Cher beyond her breaking point. What happened next would shock everyone in that studio and cement this moment as one of the most explosive confrontations in late-night television history. Cher stood up abruptly from her chair, her movement so sudden and forceful that it startled everyone in the studio. The legendary performer, all 5'8" of her. She towered over the seated host with a presence that commanded immediate attention. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the full force of someone who had spent decades refusing to be silenced. "Listen to experts." Cher's voice cut through the studio like a blade. "Jimmy, I am an expert on what it's like to be marginalized, what it's like to fight for your place in this world, and what it's like to use whatever platform you have to make things better. You sit behind this desk every night making jokes about politicians and celebrities, but when have you ever put yourself on the line for anything that matters?" The audience was completely stunned into silence. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was a raw, unfiltered moment of genuine anger from one of the most beloved figures in show business. Kimmel's face had gone pale, as he realized his guest was no longer playing by the usual talk show rules. "Sure, please, let's just," Kimmel began, but she cut him off with a sharp wave of her hand that brooked no interruption. "No, you don't get to share. Please me after what you just said," she fired back, her voice rising to fill every corner of the studio. "You want to talk about celebrity Twitter accounts? Let me tell you something about my Twitter account. Jimmy, when I tweet about veterans' issues, it's because I've spent years working with wounded warriors. When I tweet about civil rights, it's because I lived through the fight for equality. When I tweet about humanitarian crises, it's because I've been to those places and seen the suffering firsthand." The production crew behind the camera stood frozen, unsure whether to keep rolling or cut to commercial. This was uncharted territory in late-night television, and everyone in the studio knew they were witnessing something that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. Kimmel, now visibly sweating under the studio lights, made another critical misstep. Instead of de-escalating with a genuine apology, he chose to maintain his defensive posture, apparently believing he could still salvage the interview with humor. "Look, I think we're getting a little heated here," Kimmel said with a nervous laugh, gesturing toward his guest as if she were an overreacting child. "Maybe we should take a deep breath and remember that we're all friends here. This is supposed to be fun, right?" The patronizing gesture and dismissive tone proved to be the final straw. Cher's eyes flashed with a fury that had been building over decades of dealing with condescending men. What she said next would be quoted in headlines around the world within hours. "Friends," Cher's voice dropped to a deadly whisper that somehow carried more menace than her earlier shouting. "Jimmy, friends don't ambush each other on live television. Friends don't dismiss each other's life's work as celebrity nonsense. And friends sure as hell don't tell each other to take a deep breath when they're calling out disrespectful behavior." The studio had become so quiet that the hum of the cameras was audible. Even the typically animated audience seemed to be holding their collective breath, sensing they were witnessing a moment that would define both careers in ways neither had anticipated. Kimmel, perhaps finally recognizing the gravity of what he had unleashed, made one last desperate attempt to regain control of his own show. "Okay, you know what? I think maybe we should just agree to disagree here," he said, his voice edged with irritation that betrayed his growing frustration at Cher's refusal to play along. "This is getting a little too intense for a comedy show, don't you think? Maybe we should talk about something lighter, like your new tour dates or something." The attempt to trivialize the confrontation and pivot to promotional material was perhaps the most insulting move he could have made at that moment. Cher's response was immediate and devastating. It was the kind of controlled fury that only comes from years of fighting for respect in an industry that had repeatedly tried to diminish her. "Too intense for a comedy show," Cher repeated, her voice now come dangerously. "Calm, Jimmy. The only thing too intense here is your inability to treat a guest with basic respect. You invited me on your show. You attacked my credibility. You dismissed my intelligence. And now you want to pretend it never happened." What followed next would be the moment everyone in that studio would remember for the rest of their lives. Cher took a step closer to Kimmel's desk, her presence commanding every square inch of the studio space. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of 6 decades in the entertainment industry, the voice of a woman who had fought every battle twice and survived them all. "You know what, Jimmy?" she began, her tone measured but unflinchingly sharp. "I've done thousands of interviews in my life. I've dealt with hosts who were unprepared, hosts who were rude, and hosts who clearly didn't want me there. But I've never been invited onto a show just to be torn down by someone hiding behind fake smiles and cheap jokes." The camera operators didn't dare stop rolling. They knew instinctively they were capturing a moment that would become television history. Kimmel shifted in his seat, his trademark smirk long gone. "I think you're overreacting," he muttered, but Cher's voice thundered over him before he could finish. "Overreacting," she repeated, with a bitter laugh that cut through the silence. "Jimmy, I'm underreacting. Do you have any idea what it's like to spend your entire career being told your opinions don't matter? To be told to stick to singing, to smiling, to being pretty. I thought we'd moved past that. But clearly," she said, turning to face the audience, "some people never learn." Her gaze swept across the room, then straight into the cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen, she declared, her voice steady and strong. "This is what disrespect looks like in 2025. It's not always loud. Sometimes it comes wrapped in phony concern, in smug lectures about responsibility, in condescending questions from people who've never walked a day in your shoes." No one in the studio moved. The silence was electric. A few audience members instinctively reached for their phones, knowing they were witnessing something that would dominate every social feed within minutes. Kimmel, red-faced and visibly rattled, tried to recover. "Cher, I never meant. You meant every word," she cut in. Her tone final, nice. "The question is whether you're man enough to own it." She turned, retrieved her purse with deliberate grace, every movement radiating control. "You know what the saddest part of this is," she said, pausing before the exit. "I came here tonight excited to talk about my work, my documentary, my tour, to share something meaningful. But instead, I got ambushed by someone who clearly doesn't respect his guests or their experiences." Her voice softened, tinged now with quiet disappointment, and that, somehow, stung more than her anger. "Jimmy," she continued, "you sit here every night with a platform that reaches millions. You could use it to uplift people, to celebrate their stories, to have real conversations about things that matter. But instead, you used it to tear down someone who came here in good faith. That tells everyone exactly who you are." Kimmel sat frozen, his face drained of color. The man who'd made a career out of quick wit and clever comebacks suddenly had none. "I've been in this business for more than 60 years, Cher went on. "I've watched it evolve, become more inclusive, more humane. But moments like this remind me that parts of it are still stuck in the past, still run by men who think they can belittle women who dare to speak their minds." She stopped at the edge of the stage and turned back for one final line, one that would echo across every headline and timeline within hours. "To everyone watching at home," she said, looking straight into the lens, "remember this moment. Respect isn't earned by staying quiet or playing nice. Respect is something you demand when you're treated unfairly, and something you give when others deserve it. Jimmy clearly doesn't understand either." With that, Cher walked off the set, her heels clicking rhythmically across the studio floor, the only sound in a space normally filled with laughter. Kimmel sat alone, silent and stunned, as cameras kept rolling. For once, the man who always had a punchline had nothing to say. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation flooded social media. #RespectsHere began trending worldwide. Fans, celebrities, and journalists alike hailed her for standing up, not just for herself, but for every woman who'd ever been dismissed, interrupted, or diminished. By morning, Kimmel's ratings had plummeted. Industry insiders whispered about whether he could recover from a clash that had exposed something deeper than a bad interview. Cher, meanwhile, had already moved on. Her dignity intact, her message unmistakable. The confrontation would go down as more than a viral moment. It was a cultural reckoning, a reminder that even in a world built on spectacle, respect still mattered.